Hello, I'm Dave DePeters, the CEO of the National Repertory Orchestra. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here to this NRO educational event. I would especially like to welcome our 2020 NRO Fellows. We're very sorry that you're not here with us in beautiful Breckenridge this summer, but we look forward to having you here again next year. So we want to thank our sponsors, Alpine Bank, Breckenridge Grand Vacations, Colorado Creative Industries, Pat and Steve Larson, the Summit Foundation, and the town of Breckenridge. Without their support, we could not be bringing you these events. Today's seminar is with Micheal Stern. Micheal is the music director of the Kansas City Symphony, the founding music director of the Iris Orchestra, and the music director of the Stamford Symphony. He's also held positions with the Cleveland Orchestra, Orchestre Nationale de Lyon, and the Sauerbrücken Radio Symphony Orchestra. Micheal, don't laugh at my French. So you are already.
Or your German.
Or my German. Take your pick. Well, look, I had a whole other thing going on, but we don't have to talk about that because let's just get right down to it. Micheal, you've been doing a lot of things, but what have you been doing recently?
Recently, well, first of all, good to see you, Dave, and I'm glad to do this with NRO. NRO is a pretty special place, and I'm happy to be able to contribute, at least in this way, to a summer that was upended, just like everyone else's plans were. I think this way of staying in touch and communicating with the entire NRO family and the constituencies is fantastic, and it's a privilege to be here. Well, like everybody, this sort of took all of us by surprise, and the number of cancellations from what was planned for the remainder of the season and then into the summer, of which NRO was happily a part, sort of accelerated. And now we're looking at cancellations further and further out. And so the time for speculation, in a way, is over, even though we are just as unsure as we were 2 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago. But I think our thinking has to change. And so that's what I'm concentrating on, really. At first, I sort of went underground a little bit. I think we were all in denial about how this would play out. But I am coming increasingly to the conclusion that we are in the position of strength, if we choose to be, to try to determine not only the kind of world, but the kind of musical world and musical life we want to have. And so I'm spending a lot of time imagining how that would best look and figuring out ways to get people to jump on board, but also I'm doing a lot more listening than I am talking, actually, because there are a lot of good ideas. Some ideas I think are purely aspirational, but there's still something to that. Some ideas are very practical, but may miss the mark, but there's always something to be learned there also. And somehow we're going to figure this out, because when all is said and done, music endures, our need for it endures, and I think we are, in a way, going to come out of this stronger. So that's, I really am thinking a lot about that. I know, Dave, I mean, you and I have spoken a lot about it, and no, it's interesting because NRO is dedicated to the most aspirational aspect of music, which is the next generations and the future. And so the idea of constantly reinventing a better path for finding a way to make that happen is built into your DNA. I think a lot of musical organizations have not done that enough, right? And I live in the orchestral world, and there are some places which have been utterly fantastic in sort of reimagining and pivoting on a dime, and others have been a little slower and have gotten taken by surprise. And I think we just need to stay ahead of the curve. So.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting when we made the difficult decision to cancel the season. You know, that moment afterwards is, oh my God, what have we done? And then, you know, a little while after that, it was, wow, why did we wait so long? Because clearly this was the decision we had to make. But then it became incredibly exciting on what were the possibilities? What could we do that we've never done before? Things like this, you know, and offering this to musicians from all over the world was something that was not only something for this year, but something I can see us utilizing for a very long time. You know, this could very well be a big part of the NRO future. And so, yeah, I'm really, I'm encouraged by a number of the different organizations. A lot of orchestras are doing some really, really interesting things and really fun and engaging. And you guys in Kansas City are doing some fantastic things. I love the concept of Beethoven walks into a bar, you know, but all of the things that you've got going on. I mean, tell us about the process. I mean, how was this like one day you decided, okay, here are the things we're going to do, or, you know, are you still evolving things? What's going on?
Anybody with any common sense is constantly evolving. You're never going to get to your best idea the first time out. And your best idea gets better if you continue to work on it. So that's number one. I will answer what we're doing in Kansas City, because today is a big day for us. Today, we, just this morning, in partnership with every other performing arts organization in the city, formally announced that 2020 is going to be dark. So
I'm sorry about that.
Expected it. People knew it was going to, you know, but now it's written down, and that makes it real. But we've known that this was coming, obviously, for a long time. I will offer this in reply to what you said about, I mean, I agree with you, the need to find new opportunities and then realize, wow, these are really great. We're going to be able to use these in the future. I think that's absolutely right. But I think there is a silver lining to all of this COVID stuff. And that's what we have to seize upon. I think it's not that the technology has allowed us to do it, although I shudder to think what this would have been like if we were trying to do this in 1918, right, during the Spanish epidemic. I think it gives us a new resolve to connect with our community in a way which maybe we had become complacent about before. We give the concerts, we entice people to come, we truly believe in the art form, we work hard to make it happen. But now the need to stay connected and the need to stay absolutely in dialogue, and like I said before, to listen more than you offer is incredibly important. And in a way, it was just as important before. We just didn't do it as much.
Yeah.
And I think this, and then also remember, specifically with NRO, the huge boon to the organization is not that you got such great students historically from everywhere, but that what they learned and took away from NRO, they then took away to everywhere. So now, from the point of view of their experience and their increased knowledge and increased devotion to their craft and to their art, they're able to reconnect in a way which a lot of other places would not have as a resource. And I think that's incredible. In Kansas City, for me, the anxiety of the moment when I was really down about what the prospects were all around anxiety, not being able to control the uncontrollable. You know, it is not in our makeup to make programs or decide schedules based on what labs are working on in terms of vaccines and therapies. but that's part of the reality. And there's also a political moment and a national conversation going on in the country, which has to be addressed. There's just a lot of global uncertainty. But I meant what I said before. Now that we have officially announced that 2020 is dark, the conversation shifts as of today into a completely different realm. Yes, we put a lot of energy in, as you have, into doing the best we can to have an online presence and to stay vital and focused and interesting, not only in terms of music, but in terms of our service to the community, which is something else I think we could talk about. Because if we're, looking forward to a future of music in this country especially, and given the realities of that national conversation, I think the idea of music as service becomes even more important than ever. But the online stuff is vital for us and great, but we need to get back to making music, even if it is separated by a computer screen or an iPad screen. So since we now officially canceled those concerts, we are completely focused on ways to bring live music back into the community. And we're looking at everything in ways also which were not possible. I mean, I don't want to waste the time in this precious hour that we have together to talk about the vagaries of musicians' contracts and rules and regulations. Because,
believe me, we're going to be getting into that.
But there are certain things happening, conversations are happening with orchestras around the country, which would never have happened if not for people with really good intent and really great spirit deciding to come together and saying, okay, we're all in this together. We've got to figure this out. The service count for the week, the way to organize the services, the way to organize the concerts safely for people on stage, the way to organize the concerts safely to get it to an audience, whether it's streaming or in a limited way with social distancing inside the hall. Or how do we figure out safely and efficiently and financially viable, in a financially viable way, to make the orchestra mobile and to move around the city, not just with a string quartet or with a wind quintet or with a brass ensemble, but with an orchestra, like a pop-up, and be able to bring music to every corner of the community when they need it and want it. We're looking at all of that. And we couldn't really do that until the season was canceled.
That's a good point.
So now that we have, it's a little bit like a liberation. Because of the constraint, you now are free to imagine anything in a different direction. So that's what we're doing.
Well, unfortunately, something that the orchestra world has been, unfortunately, a little too lacking in for too many years. There have been the occasional thought providers who have done some pretty interesting things, but unfortunately, we've been sort of niched into, you all come to us, come into the concert hall, sit, be quiet for 2 hours, and then give us your money. And we're going to have to look at all of these things differently.
Yeah.
Talking about programming, we're going a little out of order because we do have questions, but since we're on the subject. So your first concert with the NRO would have been tomorrow night.
Yeah.
With an all French program. Or French-ish program, Ravel, Prokofiev, Debussy, and Ravel. And then your Friday night performance included Tchaik 4. So talk to us a little bit about your programming ideas, and has anything changed recently? Would you, if you had to do it over again and I called you up 6 months ago, knowing what you know now, would you be doing anything differently, or would the program be the same? But how are you looking at programming then and now, and if anything different?
It's a nuanced question, because in a way I would have
all about the nuance, Michael.
It's all about the nuance. No, Dave, you're all about the nuance. Yeah. I think in a way I wouldn't have changed anything, because I think the program, which you and I discussed at length, was chosen with really specific intent, not only because I think it's such great music to offer to the audience, but also it's such great music to study and to play and to digest. A lot of people at NRO would have been playing some of those pieces for the first time. Many of them would not be playing them for the first time. And that's part of what we do. I think the reason old music continues to be new again is because those same notes that we labor to understand the first time still give us reason to go deeper if you're looking at them for the 50th or the 100th time. And so that's a lesson well learned early, because it's going to be with you your entire life. You cannot take for granted the life that is behind the notes that you can't see yet when you first open a score or start to play something, until you let that work on you. Sometimes it comes more quickly, sometimes it takes years, but it always continues to go more. So I think the program was chosen with all of that in mind. That said, I think there is a reason to imagine and I say this for myself, but I say this for everyone in the country, a more inclusive scope to the way we consider programs. And I don't only mean, although certainly part of it, I don't only mean composers of color reflecting diverse cultures. I think it also means opening yourself up individually to the idea that everybody has a voice and we should be listening to everything. Because we have always made the case that we want everybody to join with us and listen. How can we ask that of others if we don't do it ourselves? So I think we would have had a very interesting conversation if some of the events of the last 6, 8, 10 weeks had happened, but we were still giving the concerts in Breckenridge this week. Maybe we would have changed the program. Maybe we would have had a vigorous debate about how programs can be changed, or maybe we would have made the case, as is rightly done by a lot of our colleagues, including musicians of color, that Beethoven is no less relevant now than it was 12 weeks ago, 12 years ago, or 200 years ago. So I think that's the great thing about being able to use art, not only for yourself to go and express out into the world, but also to reflect. Sorry.
Spill something?
Yeah, I'm at my sister's house and her cat just came up and chewed quietly at my toes. So I'm back. So it's not just about the art that you use to have your voice out into the world. It's also the way you use it as a reflection of what's happening in the world. And if you don't have that balance and don't understand that, then you're selling yourself short, and you're certainly selling your audiences short.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Talk to us. Look, I would consider you, and we've known each other for a long time. I certainly consider you a champion of American music and certainly young composers. What is it about the ability to bring in a premiere, or to, almost more importantly, the second and third performance, to be able to give a piece a second or third performance and begin to give it some legs? What is it for you? What is the attraction for you? And looking for, supporting American and young composers.
Well, first of all, I think it's part and parcel of what we do, right? So you cannot have a really significant impact if you're only a generalist. You can help a lot of people in a very small way, in some way, I guess. And I'm not territorial or nationalistic about this, but I do think that we have a responsibility, especially to young composers, but to all the composers in our corner of the world, which is not to say I don't do contemporary music by a lot of other people elsewhere. But a long time ago, I decided that the American musical scene demands our devotion. And so the chance to work with young composers for me has been skewed pretty much towards American composers, sort of, by design. I was, as you mentioned at the top, music director of an orchestra in Germany for 4 years, the Radio Symphony Orchestra of Saarbrücken. And I did an unbelievable amount of contemporary German music, obviously. So I think it's part of the responsibility of being a music director and being an artist to serve the community, and in this case, the larger national community in which you live. But I think what is universal is the idea of discovering something new. There's something about original work which is different. So a lot of times when we pick up a Beethoven symphony that we've studied since school, even if we haven't conducted it before, although at this point there's not that much orchestral Beethoven that I haven't conducted, but if you know the language and if you know the style and you have what your teachers told you and what your experience told you, you're approaching that in a certain way. And it's also the way we were taught. Now you have this really fresh voice coming with something utterly new, and that's really exciting. You have to make it stick quickly because everybody's looking at this music for the first time, and you've got to come up with a performance that makes sense. I'm glad you mentioned the second and third performances, because that's when the work really gets interesting. I have never done a second or third performance of a new work that I didn't feel was better than the first, even though I really try to make every premiere good. But as you know, things happen and everybody's sort of swimming, and sometimes composers will come to you after the first performance and say, here's a list of 48 changes which I'm making.
Exactly.
So when things
notes on your stand.
Well, sure. So when you have a chance to digest all of that and truly figure it out in a way which does honor to what the composer tried to do, but also makes people love it, that for me is really the payoff, honestly. Mm-hmm. When you can say to an audience without words, just by advocating for something which you so believe in, and they get it, then you know you've done something. And I freely confess that sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes the music just doesn't get across the footlights. You and I both have had experiences with music that just didn't quite.
Yeah, I'm not sure it got past the first violins, but what I love is you're right. It is a language. It's like learning a new language, and you know how I am with languages. But it's like learning a new language in that there's this excitement of being there for the first time, and you don't know where this is going to go and where this is going to end up, and you think, well, my God, this is something that is a privilege to be a part of, to be in the midst of something that's brand new. And, I have to say, when I was younger, I didn't appreciate it nearly as much. When I first started in the Buffalo Phil, we did a lot of contemporary music, and I was immature as a musician and young. And it wasn't until I started working with David Zimmern when I started playing in Baltimore, and he really showed me the way of, taking this interpretation to a whole new level. Say, this is important. This is our time. This is the sound of our time. And we have to own it, and we have to embrace it, and we have to nurture it. And Micheal, I think you do a fantastic job with that.
Well, I do think, so here's something which I would share. There's certain pieces, you and I both have had, all of us, we've all had experience with this. Certain enormous pieces which you think, oh my goodness, as a student, they're so difficult. When I first heard the Rite of Spring, I didn't understand it. I was pretty excited by it, but I didn't understand it. Then when I first started to study conducting, it was all you could do, like holding on with your fingernails, just to get the beat patterns down, just to get the very, very surface part of the rhythm in some kind of recognizable shape. And you do that as a student, and you think, oh, you've got the piece. The Rite of Spring is a rhythmical piece. It would be stupid not to say that. The rhythm is not where God lives in that piece. Yeah. And the more you, so now when I do that piece, there is absolutely nothing difficult about beating it. And there's nothing difficult about the rhythm because it is so unbelievably logical and it's organized inspiration in a way that very few pieces have ever been. But then you can even get it to vibrate more, right? That's why that piece is great. Not because, you know, it caused a riot at the premiere, which by the way, it didn't really. That was all hype. But that shows you that devotion. And what's interesting is that when that piece started, its life, everybody thought it was practically unplayable. The opening bassoon solo was considered literally unplayable. And now you hear it played so well by so many students, right, because they know how to do it. That's why music gets into, it gets into us on an individual level, but it gets into us in the larger sense, you know? The way we hear Bartók, the way we hear Messiaen, the way we hear Lutoslawski even, is unthinkable for the people who heard it when it was just written. Who knows what the music that's being written now is going to be, how it's going to be interpreted in 50 years. But I think that our duty when we're recreating music for the first time and working with a composer is to leave yourself open to the things that you don't understand right away, because you don't know what you're going to get. And the more you are open to it, the more quickly it will penetrate you.
Absolutely. So we could probably talk about this for a long time, but we've got a lot of other things a lot of other issues to get to. So if you don't mind, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. But for everybody in the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in, and we'll try to get to them as well. I'm sure you have a lot to ask Micheal as well. But so a lot of our musicians, when we ask them for questions, a lot of them are focused on auditions. And so we've got a couple of questions here that I want to make sure that we get to completely, and then a couple that I have that I think might be interesting for people to hear from you. In general, because let me ask you this, first of all, did you sit in on when you were assistant in Cleveland, did you sit on auditions for that?
Well, I not only sat in on them, I was on stage. Cleveland at that time was one of the few orchestras in the country that never used a screen. Most orchestras used a screen for the opening rounds and then took them down for the finals. Kansas City historically uses a screen for everything, including the finals. But Cleveland used a screen for nothing. And I was the guy on stage proctoring for 5 years I did that. I sat on stage, I put the music up, I was sitting, 8 feet from whoever the candidate, auditioning, and it was an agonizing experience.
It had to be fun, yeah.
Oh, you pick up on everything. And the ones who came out, I own this. I just thought to myself, that's gonna go down well. And the people who came out thinking, I can barely stand up and draw breath, they had gotten themselves into that place where it was going to be difficult for them to show their best. Auditions are tricky. Auditions can be, and by and large are, unmusical experiences, because music was not meant to be judged. And you cannot play as if people are judging you. And if I had one piece of advice for anybody as performers, and then by extension auditioning to be an employed performer, I would say if you can get yourself out of that headspace into a place where you're playing for the reasons that you know you want to play, you will impress more because you're not playing for anybody. Music is not a competitive sport. So if your obsession at the moment is constantly playing the loop simultaneously as you're making sound, thinking, what are they thinking of me?
Mm.
You can't get it done. You can't do your business. The only way, and I've said this a number of times in different ways, but you come to an audition, you're told what time you're going to play, you're told where you're going to warm up, you're given 47 different instructions. And it's not about you at all. And everybody is telling you stuff. And then you walk out on stage and they're going to tell you what to start with in some cases. Usually they'll say you can play your solo piece and you've had a chance to choose that. But even then, audition lists are pretty prescribed. And that's just the way it is. The minute they say, okay, we'll hear the Berlioz. Okay, we'll hear the Beethoven. Candidate number 438, please play now the Debussy excerpt. The minute they say that, and remember also, you're playing into a curtain by and large, which is also an unmusical experience. You have to completely erase all of that and say, you listen to me because I'm playing for me. I'm playing this music, which I know. And this is the way it goes. And then you play. And unfortunately, not every committee does this. The good ones all do. And there are many, many orchestras that populate their committees with really, really good people who want only the best possible colleagues to come and join them. And for me, the most successful ones are the ones who are listening for the music behind the notes. They're not attaching that much importance to every tiny little slip. They're looking for something else. They're looking for somebody who's actually playing the piece and not playing the excerpt. And if they get any kind of artistic feeling, they will perk up and listen. And then they'll say, I want to hear more. Once you do that, you're in. Even if you don't win the audition, you're already in competition. You're in the game.
Right.
The minute people stop listening, it's hard to make the case.
Right. It's hard for, I think, unless you've been on the other side of that curtain, and I think it's hard for people to understand that when you're listening to people, you're not the enemy and you're not that person who's trying to eliminate. You want to find the person who you are going to sit next to
Right.
for the next however many years, next 10, 15, 30, 40 years. And you want to find that person who's going to inspire you and keep you moving the way you feel you are hopefully doing to your colleagues as well. And so that means, really coming, with the package already taken care of. But then what is that extra? What is that bit that's going to say, I want to play with this person. This is the person for me.
That's right.
What is different? Were there any differences between auditions in Germany? And I don't know if you were involved in Lyon at all, but with Sauerbrücken and here?
The answer would be yes. So in Saarbrücken, auditions were a service, were an orchestral service. The entire orchestra was in the hall. And people came on stage and they played. And then the orchestra voted. It was a very different, I think there was, the Vorstand and I had a more weighted vote, I think. It's hard to remember. But certainly it was not delegated. It's the whole electoral college argument, right? You've nominated a committee and the committee is going to listen. The committee is going to decide with the music director, and that committee then becomes the tenure review committee when the probationary period is over and the consideration of permanent tenure is made. And that's very different than everybody getting a say and getting a vote.
Yeah, that's quite a system. I'm sure there were some great discussions throughout that time. So a couple of other questions from the musicians. How would you recommend musicians preparing mentally or mentally preparing for an audition?
So I think that's a big question. I mean, it depends on your emotional makeup, and it depends on your personality, I guess. You can't be too prepared. So you cannot, and you know, Murphy's Law is what it is. If there's one thing that you're nervous about, that's going to be the one that they ask you. They just, you know, you can smell fear. But I think you can also over practice. And I think you can also, so being uber prepared does not mean getting yourself into a place of such rigid tightness that you cannot see yourself in the music. I mean, all of us, when we stand on stage, it's partially the work that you do in the practice room, it's partially the enormous work that you do in your head, it's what you bring from your heart, but it's also a little bit being a communicator, being an actor, being the vessel for this moment. It's not, you know, we are not so important to say that we are a vessel for the composer's language, although that is a true statement. But it's more, you are the one of the conduits for this emotional and artistic experience that you want the audience to have. That's still true in an audition. So if you cannot feel yourself, right? You can't take a deep enough breath because you're so nervous. You can't, everything feels tight. You realize, oh my goodness, I didn't cut my nail the right way. And it's, you know, whatever it is to distract you from this feeling of unfettered ease. This is the music I believe in. I've practiced well and I know how to play it. I'm going to play it for you. And then at that point, you're free. It's hard to be free in an audition. I'm not minimizing the taxing nervousness of the situation, but I think that would be a big recommendation to try to get so prepared that you can then let it go a little bit. Because if you walk out holding on to it too tightly, you won't be able to be free. That's number one. Number two is, from a very practical point of view, know exactly what you want and why you want it. So you have to know the excerpt that you're playing in context of the larger piece and why it's there and why you would do it differently. But by and large, you're coming out to a hall that you may not know, to an acoustic that you may not know, playing for people that you can't see. And in some cases, I think now a lot of bass players would travel with their instruments, but sometimes they have to borrow because of the size. Certainly percussionists, timpani auditions are done on a lot of times on the equipment that the orchestra provides. So you have to, you know, feel comfortable with something that's not your own axe. And that means you have to be flexible. So as you prepare for the audition, know exactly what you want, but then challenge yourself. What if they say, as I sometimes have done in the audition to a candidate, sometimes because I just want to see if they're flexible enough to do it, and sometimes because I thought it needed correction, can you play that a little bit more quickly? Can you play a little bit more slowly? You know, out here, I know you don't know the acoustic, out here, all the highs and lows are getting evened out a little bit. Can you really stay pianissimo until the sforzando? And when you get to the sforzando, make us feel it. You know, in this spot, Mozart was very careful not to write a diminuendo. It was a subito piano. Can we really hear that once again and really make an effort? If the candidate then does that, the entire committee goes, oh, that's quick. They adapted. That's good. So everything that shows your flexibility and your, again, your ability to listen more than talk, listen more than do, is a credit to you.
Okay, great. What I have a couple of live questions as well that I want to get to in just a second, but is there anything, let's do it by example. Let's think about the last couple of auditions that you heard in Kansas City, for instance. Obviously not naming names or instruments or anything, but just what is the sort of, when you think about the final rounds and it's down to one or two, three, four people, what was the determining factor? What helped you over the edge with one person? And was there anything that held you back from somebody who you decided, that's not quite what we're looking for?
Sure, and I don't mind naming the audition, but it's always the same answer to that question. Who's making an artistic statement and who's just playing the instrument really well? Because in the end, you have to be pretty arrogant to think that if you are auditioning for one spot in an orchestra and there are 100 people coming, even if 50 of them are terrible, 50 of them are not. Which means that they're all super prepared, super gifted, super competent, as you are. So what's going to make the difference? What's going to make the difference is the depth of that engagement, even in that short little excerpt, whatever it may be, to be able to say, I have something to say. I mean, it sounds so Pollyannish, really. It sounds so facile. Oh, what do you have to say? What does that mean anyway? Play what's on the page and play it compellingly. But we all know that sometimes you hear the exact same notes played three different ways, and then a fourth person comes and plays the exact same thing, and you're in a different place. The last couple of auditions in Kansas City, we were lucky enough that in the midst of a lot of excellent playing in the finals, there were things that we heard that immediately drew everybody's attention in such a immediate way that there was really no discussion. That's lucky, because sometimes discussions for auditions can become a long slog, and you don't want to misstep. And like I said before, we have no live round, right? Through the finals. We do have one now for titled positions. We have a chamber music round, which comes afterwards, which is open only to people who are already certified to win the job. So Kansas City doesn't say yes or no, you're in. Kansas City, up through the finals, votes for anywhere from 0 to how many candidates who have earned the right to be considered for the job. So we know that they're all of that quality. And then it's up to us to decide among them. So when we get to that place, if it's a title position and we want to bring the screen down, we'll have them play some chamber music with members of the orchestra. But we have made many appointments with the screen still up. And I have to say, I'm incredibly proud of the committee, the way that we choose our committees and the committees that we've had. And the conversation is always really only about the music. Like, what are we hearing? Why are we hearing it? And what are we looking for? And I will say this, because I'm incredibly proud of this as well. One of the reasons that I think we have been successful in Kansas City to bring the artistic level ever forward is because we establish a standard and then always look to exceed it. So the idea of finding somebody in an audition that doesn't match that standard is not even a question. Which is why when you've got so many candidates who are so good and they all could pretty well match a certain standard, to find the person who really goes beyond that and to choose the right man or the right woman for that job at that time in the orchestra, it is often a reflection of what we hear back in terms of that last little spark of personality, engagement, insight.
Great, thank you. So let's take it to the next step. Somebody wins an audition. Now they've got a period of time where they're in their trial period. What advice would you have for somebody who's won the position and now, for whether it's 1 year or 2 year, are now in this trial position? How do they manage the relationships with musicians, with their colleagues? How do they manage the relationship with you, etc.?
Well, this is a non-starter for me. They better come with a pretty hefty set of really good recipes, because they're not going to get into the orchestra and stay there if they can't, bring it. At a party, you have to get at least one good dish and be able to sell it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that came from our good friend Jeff Kaner, principal flute of the Philadelphia Orchestra, who actually seriously wanted to make the recipe book part of the official audition process. But I digress just a little bit. I think once you win the job, you have to, well, that's an interesting question, because there's some places which may have a different opinion. I think, and again, I talk about Kansas City because I think it's so true there. I think a lot of places have it, not everywhere. Kansas City really takes care of its own and works together inside the orchestra in a pretty special way. But I'd say the same thing about Irish Orchestra, and I'd say the same thing about Stamford, and I'd say the same thing about Lyon Saarbrücken. I was lucky to be involved with organizations which really were, as a collective, extraordinary people. So you want to be able to come and, you don't want to ever evince arrogance or dismissiveness. That doesn't go down very well and is quickly not appreciated. You also don't want to come and just be neutral because you're afraid of misstepping. You need to be authentic. But I think, again, listening more than opining is always better. And you're joining a group as a new musician in the orchestra that already has worked out some things, rightly or wrongly. Before you start to either jump on the bandwagon or criticize that, you need to know what it is. And so you need to be open enough to join into that collective. And then, especially if you're hired as a title player, as a principal player, you need to be respectful of the people already in your section, but they're looking for leadership from you. And I think that leadership, in a sense, that kind of proactive music making, should come from every musician. That really separates the greatest orchestras from those that are not, right? Because when everybody is playing like we are part of this group for a reason, this is the reason, boom, you hear that from the, right? So you need to feel like, I'm a contributor, I'm being listened to, but I'm also listening all the time. And so, obviously, there are ways to be a good colleague and there are ways not to be a good colleague. I would say don't do the latter, do the former. But I think being authentic, first of all, people can sense when you're not. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but in the end, you are who, we have a terrible burden as musicians, but we also have a wonderful advantage. Who we are is how we play. And if you work on that, and if you're true to yourself, and you can really connect with that when you play, instantly you're playing. It doesn't mean that it'll be right or wrong, or a teacher or colleague can't suggest something else, or you get inspiration from a conductor, or you know enough to think that the conductor doesn't know what he's doing, and so you need to. There's all sorts of wiggle room there. But in terms of connecting with what you really believe, that makes it real. And nobody can argue with that. They can disagree with a point, but they cannot dismiss that moment of authenticity. And I think that goes a long way. When people say, oh, he's such a great colleague, what does that mean? That means he comes and does his job, or her job, that he or she comes with an empathy and an understanding for the people playing music around her, and devotion to the institution and to the art that we share. And that's it. There's nothing else there. Then all the nonsense about, oh, they're so much fun, you know, I heard that they won the Iditarod 3 years ago, or they're champion ice skaters, or, you know, they make the best quiche. All of that is fine and great and is interesting. I think people who come with a large encyclopedic knowledge of craft cocktails, thumbs up. But all of that is beside the point, honestly. The real thing is, you look at me in the eye, we're playing a quartet, what's going on there? And if that's real, you're in business.
Yeah. When I was 15, I started studying with my very first teacher. And 3 months after I started studying with him, I got my first job, which is pretty stupid. He was a little shocked that I got my job. He said, look, let me give you a piece of advice. Go in, smile, keep your mouth shut, and be prepared. And I spent 35 years doing exactly that. And there's something to be said for that. You know, you people, it's great to be getting along, but ultimately in a 109 musician orchestra, you're going to have a couple of really good friends. You're going to have a lot of really great colleagues, you know, and those really great colleagues are what makes your life really great, because when you are backstage about ready to walk out on stage, you are about to be part of something greater than you are. And that is a thrill that we all hope to have in our lives. And that's really about just coming in prepared and being ready.
That's the privilege of it.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to change gears a little bit again. Another topic. We have a write-in that this is the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. And which symphony would you choose, if you had to choose one, to celebrate his birthday?
Oh my goodness. It's like asking mom, which kid does she love best? In my family, it was always me, by the way, but I'm kidding.
Yeah, because I know better.
Yeah. Well, I did not think that Beethoven needed to be rescued from obscurity. So if we had played not a note of Beethoven during this 250th year, we still would be honoring him. As it turns out, because of coronavirus, we barely played a note of Beethoven. But I will confess that I programmed more than just one symphony, because especially with Beethoven, you cannot really honor what he did unless you take in its totality the spectrum of how he changed music. And that's really a fascinating angle on him. Each individual piece can be great, but when you take his whole output as more than the sum of its parts, you really start to get overwhelmed. And so when you break down those parts and re-examine each one, the second symphony is a miracle. The fifth symphony is, of course, what it is. But the eighth, too often neglected. The fourth, genius. The ninth is, of course, the ninth. The Missa Solemnis. I had all of these pieces programmed, all of it. The Great Revolution is, of course, the Eroica. But I'll tell you, honestly, this year was also the 100th anniversary of the birth of my father. And not only as a violinist, but as an advocate for music, for young people, for change in the world. And now, especially, I think about, we are in his birthday month. I think about what he would be doing, what he would be talking about, what he would be fighting for at this moment in American history. And I can only hope that we can be a little bit in that direction. But he had a lot of people who came into his orbit who either studied with him or were influenced with him. He never formally taught him. And I had a whole bunch of performances honoring both Beethoven and him throughout the year. And unfortunately, a lot of them got canceled. But in terms of violin music, one of the ones that we squeezed in the weekend before everything closed down, or 2 weekends before, was Pinchas Zuckerman playing the Beethoven Concerto. And I would say you cannot discount the Eroica or the Missa Solemnis or the Opus 127 or Opus 130 quartets or the Appassionata Sonata or anything else. But there is something so sublime about the depth of that piece and the artlessness of it, which if you really had to choose one piece by Beethoven, and probably would be a piano piece because he was a pianist and so forth, but you can't argue with the violin concerto. And then to have, such a long-standing friend who's also tied to my family playing it in the way that he did, I was very sorry to lose the season in Kansas City, everywhere else that I was slated to go, NRO. I was very sorry to lose the Beethoven celebration, but I'll have that. And that, for me, the Beethoven celebration year and the celebration year for my father was a success.
That's great. That's great. I want to go to this one quickly. You studied with Max Rudolph.
I did.
Obviously, great Beethoven scholar. One thing that he told you that stays with you every day.
Well, there are so many things. His big phrase was pertinent information. He had no patience for, none. What could you bring from studying, from experience, from discovery that will make this music, which you in your wildest dreams could not write? I'm not saying that you cannot put yourself on some equal footing with the composer to try to get into his or her head, but you cannot take shortcuts. What information will make you a better musician? What information will make you understand this piece? And he got pertinent information from everywhere, from musical study, from non-musical study, from experience, from conversation with other people, from just trial and error, from every place, and was constantly rethinking things. I came to him when he was pretty advanced in years. He was in his late 70s, early 80s, and I was with him until he died at the age of 93, 94. And he was the most youthful thinker because he was always looking for new information. Of all the many, many, many things he talked about conducting, about music, about being a musician, about the integrity of being a musician, all of which I carry with me, the one thing that I most remember was his insistence on looking for pertinent information.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So to switch gears a little bit, now give us your best Max impression.
I can't. The man had eyebrows literally the size of Wisconsin. as right, flapping up and down like this, and he would never, ever, ever speak before he considered it. And I remember once we had a class, Mark Russell Smith, Paavo Järvi, Barbara Yar, and I. And the topic of the day was Wagner, and Max came in, took out his little brown bag, peeled his banana, started to eat it, which was always the class. And for some reason, there had been this was a long time ago, right? We were both younger, Dave, we were both younger.
I know I was.
And the pop star of the moment was Michael Jackson. And there was this, I can't remember which orchestra it was, but some orchestra had decided to jump on the bandwagon and do an evening of Michael Jackson's songs. I'm guessing it was a pop show. I'll just throw that out there, but still, yeah. And there was some heated debate among us. And Max was just eating his banana and sitting there absolutely silent. And finally, I think it might have been Barbara, maybe it was Pablo. Oh, what do you think? And Max looked at us and said, "Permit me not to be interested." The way he delivered that line, the idea of using and being able to say with a straight face, "Please permit me not to be interested." I almost fell off my chair. It was the funniest thing I'd ever heard, and I use it to this day.
It's brilliant. Delivered as only he would.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about career choices, because
I'm looking for one.
Yeah, because you're probably up for one right now. Now, you were in Harvard as an American history major.
Yes.
And obviously made a big career. You had been studying violin, viola before, and then, or no, I guess you were just studying violin before, right?
Yeah.
And then started studying viola to get into Curtis. But a lot of us are looking at this as a choice. We want to go into music. We want to be part of that life, that lifestyle. But, there's an unsureness of everybody at a certain age of, am I going to have a career? Am I going to make it in this career? Am I going to enjoy it when I get there? So I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts behind career choices, and also how to make a career in music not a successful career, but a successful life.
So super quickly, because we're running out of time. It's a little bit disingenuous to say it was a choice or it wasn't a choice. It's always a choice, of course, but I played music since I was 3.5 years old. So I didn't have a chance to decide. I knew I wanted it. I asked for the violin, but music was around me. I can't remember when I didn't know how to read music. So that was sort of a given. But also my parents were both emigres, right? So they came, all my siblings and I are all first generation, and it was the classic dream of my father, who never went to school. It's not that he didn't go to college, he didn't go to any school. And so he really wanted to see his children live the American dream. That also would be another 4-hour conversation, what that means. But I went through high school and into college convinced I was not going to be a professional musician. Music pulled me back. So I did study American history. I took the LSATs. I was going to apply to law school. But I ran across this book by Max Rudolph that brought me to him, that brought me to Philadelphia, that brought me to Curtis. I went back into playing. I had played, I was Juilliard pre-college. I've been, doing everything before college. College, I played, but it was not my major course of study. I learned other things, and then I went right back into that world afterwards with Curtis. But it was very much because he opened up this world of possibility of conducting, and I just wanted to know more about it. And yes, I had the luxury of being able to take some years after college and I realized how lucky I was, and be able to study more. The more I studied, the more I realized this was going to be right. So it was a choice to pursue it, but then it pursued me. And I think it's harder now. I admire people who continue to have the passion to want to go into it, because in a way, people always say the competition is more. You can't let that dissuade you, and it's not the old saw about follow your passion. Although I think you can't go wrong in life if you follow your passion. But just like COVID showed us with musical and orchestral possibilities, the fact that there is so much more competition for orchestral jobs, if that's what you want to do in music, just because it's now, especially post-COVID, but even before, difficult to carve out a place for yourself as a chamber musician or as a solo artist. I think it forces us to find new ways to make art happen. And there can't be too much art in the world. So whether it is finding new entrepreneurial ways, finding new ways to land your message, finding new ways to make art happen in a way that touches more people. There are more people on the planet than there were before, meaning there are more people who want to hear music than there were before. That's just numbers. That's not speculation. How to get to those people and how to make that happen in a way that can actually put food on the table, that's a different conversation. And certainly now, in this moment of crisis, you and I both know, we all know, people who are really struggling, people who had jobs and they're not assured, and people who are already living on the margins.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with our society. I mean, that's really something I think about all the time. And we have to get back in a profound way to being the country that that would honor this potential in us. We're not. We don't support the arts in a way that actually will bring both economic and artistic benefit to society. And we don't do it with education, and the two are linked. But I think there are possibilities always. And I think it means you have to work hard. You have to work harder than you thought, maybe even to get to the same place. Standards are higher. Expectations are higher. Competition for leisure time is harder. And still, people will be moved by art in a way that doesn't happen with any other experience. And that's never going to go away. And if you're the person to bring that experience to them, you will find your way. You will. I'm convinced of that. It's not always going to be easy. But the other good thing is, in my experience, musicians take care of one another. And so there is this, you join a pretty special community of fellow travelers, fellow human beings, when you become a musician. And that links you in a pretty special way. And I think if you really believe in something and you go and follow it, it might lead you to a place that you never thought you would find. It might actually lead you out of music and into something else where music informs every action and every thought that you do, but you're not actually playing music for a living. I don't know, but I don't think anything is impossible.
That's great. That's great. One last question for you.
Yeah.
I know we want to keep it short, which is not easy. This has to do with the future of orchestras, because there's a lot of anxiety. We talked about it a little bit at the very top of this conversation. But do you think COVID will change
Yes.
orchestras? And what do you think that's going to, I mean, do you have a prediction on what it might look like, or do you have any thoughts on how it will possibly evolve?
COVID is not going away. Even when we've conquered the disease, the lingering effects of this trauma on all of us have made us rethink everything about our society. And especially in America, which it will require a lot of dedicated thinking and re-examination to make what was not good finally well in this country, and well meaning healthy, and what was good to try to get it back as best we can. But it's not going to be the same. Orchestras are going to have to be more flexible. Orchestras are going to have to adapt, and orchestras are going to have to look for their audience in a slightly different vernacular. But I think that the idea, the feeling of going to concerts and performances in general will be different for a while. And even when it comes back, it may still be different. I think the technology that we have used to advance our cause when we've been so socially distanced is not going away, but that needs to be incorporated into live performance and our regular work as musicians in a way that it wasn't before. So that's going to be very different. And I think in the end, like I said right at the top, we could be in a much stronger position. But I think orchestras as institutions are going to be fundamentally different. And I think, unfortunately, there will be some casualties. Unless they are really proactive and really far thinking and not afraid to take bold steps, if they try to simply hold on to the way things were and cobble something together, I don't see that as a recipe for success. So we have to come back to basics. How can music serve the community? How can we as artists make a difference? And why is it important to the people who say we need and want music? Figure that out and then make it happen.
Right. Thank you very much. Look, just one last thing though, because I want to test you to see if you can do this in 3 sentences or less.
I can't. Okay, now what's your question?
What do you love most about music?
The way it makes you feel. I mean, honestly, music is always different, and it makes you remember, and it makes you hope simultaneously. And I don't mean that in a stupid way. It makes you remember. It makes you remember people and places and things, but it makes you remember. It makes you human.
Human. Yeah. Makes you remember you're human.
And it makes you remember that you're not alone. There is not one art form that brings people together as quickly and as deeply as music.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. Micheal Stern, thank you for sharing your time with us today. I am told that I have to say something about a survey at the end of this conversation as we click out. You'll be asked to do a survey. Please participate in that survey. That would really help us for the future. And everyone be well. And thank you very, very much, Micheal. Give my best to David and Shira and the girls.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck to us all. Good luck to NRO, and hope to see you soon. Thanks.